John Miller couldn't sleep. The night sky outside his Montana cabin seemed different somehow. Brighter, more crowded, as if the stars themselves were watching Earth with newfound interest. His phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Only 3 people had this number, and none of them called without good reason. "Miller," he answered, already reaching for his go-bag. "It's happening," said General Warren. "Get to Groom Lake. Now." 6 hours later, Miller sat in an underground conference room that officially didn't exist. Around the table were 12 people: military officers, scientists, intelligence analysts, and one exhausted-looking President of the United States. Dr. Olivia Hammond entered last, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She carried a tablet and looked as if she hadn't slept in days. "Play it again," the President ordered. The room darkened, and a projection appeared on the wall. The message that had changed everything. The being on screen wasn't completely alien, humanoid in basic shape, but with gray-blue skin and eyes too large for its narrow face. When it spoke, its mouth didn't match the English words perfectly. "People of Earth, I am Ambassador Zurex of the Galactic Confederacy. We have observed your civilization for many cycles. Your species has reached the technological threshold where contact becomes necessary. The Confederacy brings order and prosperity to all worlds under its protection. Earth will now join our alliance. Representatives will arrive to establish a transition government. Resistance is unnecessary and would bring suffering to your people. We await your acceptance." The lights came up. Miller studied the faces around the table. Fear, anger, confusion. The message was received simultaneously by every major radio telescope and communications array worldwide. Explained Hammond. "Our analysis confirms it originated beyond our solar system." "How long do we have?" asked the President. Hammond shook her head. "Based on the transmission characteristics, their ships could already be in our system." "Options." The President looked around the table. "We fight," said General Warren. "With what?" countered Secretary Peters. "We have no defense against a civilization capable of interstellar travel." Miller cleared his throat. "With respect, Mr. President, there's something wrong with this message." All eyes turned to him. "Major Miller, explain." The President nodded. "It's too convenient. Perfect English. Clear demands. They call it an alliance, but there's no negotiation offered. This isn't first contact. It's an invasion warning." Hammond was studying her tablet. "Major Miller might be right. The transmission contains embedded data streams we can't decode yet, but they're massive. Way more information than needed for a simple greeting." "What are you suggesting?" asked the President. "Buy time," Miller said simply. "Respond peacefully while we prepare." The President nodded slowly. "Draft a response. We're honored by their contact. We request more information before their representatives arrive. Express hope for peaceful exchange." "And meanwhile," asked General Warren, "activate our contingency plans. Quietly, get our best people working on defense options." Hammond raised her hand. "Sir, there's something else. The alien transmission contains unusual quantum signatures. I'd like permission to study them with my team." "Granted. What are you looking for?" "I don't know yet, but it's like nothing I've ever seen." The meeting ended with assignments. As people filed out, Miller approached Hammond. "You found something you didn't want to say in there," he said quietly. She glanced around, then whispered, "The quantum patterns, they might be a weakness, a way into their systems." Miller nodded. "I need to know if you find anything useful." "You'll be my first call," she promised. 3 days later, that call came. But by then, massive Confederate ships had appeared in Earth's orbit, and the game had changed entirely. "They're earlier than we expected." Hammond's voice was tight with fear. "What about your discovery?" Miller asked, watching fighter jets scramble uselessly in the distance. "It works. Their systems have a fundamental vulnerability. But we need time to develop weapons based on it." "Time," Miller repeated grimly. is the one thing we don't have. Above them, the first Confederate shuttles began their descent toward major cities worldwide. The occupation of Earth had begun. 3 months into the occupation, Earth had changed beyond recognition. Confederate flags, spiral patterns in blue and silver, flew over government buildings in every major city. Alien soldiers patrolled the streets with weapons that could stun or kill with equal efficiency. Most humans kept their heads down and followed the new rules. Not Olivia Hammond. She worked in the basement of an abandoned library in what used to be suburban Chicago. The room was filled with salvaged equipment, stolen alien tech, and 5 dedicated scientists who refused to surrender. "Pass me the oscillator," she said to Dr. Patel, who handed over a device cobbled together from Earth components and Confederate parts. The door opened, and Miller entered with 2 resistance fighters. They carried backpacks full of supplies and a small metal container with alien markings. "You got it," Hammond said, not a question, but a statement of relief. Miller nodded. "Lost 2 good people doing it." Hammond took the container reverently. Inside was a power cell from a Confederate patrol vehicle. This could be the key to scaling up our disruptor. The discovery had come 3 weeks after the invasion. Confederate technology relied on quantum-linked particles that operated on specific frequency patterns. Once Hammond identified these patterns, she found a way to create destructive interference that could shut down their systems temporarily. "The main problem," she explained to Miller as they worked, "is range. Right now, we can disrupt their tech within 50 feet. We need miles, not feet." Outside, loudspeakers broadcast the daily message. "The Confederate Authority brings peace and progress. Report suspicious activity. Compliance brings rewards." Miller grimaced at the sound. "Any progress with the communications network?" Hammond nodded. "We've got 12 cells connected now from Boston to Denver, all using the frequency blind spots I found in their monitoring systems." The resistance had grown gradually. At first, just small acts of defiance, graffiti, damaged equipment, stolen supplies. Now they had organized cells in most major cities, sharing information and coordinating strikes. Last week, they had their first major victory, an ambush near the Rocky Mountains that disabled an entire Confederate patrol without a single human casualty. "They're getting nervous," Miller said. "Doubling patrols, implementing curfews. And they're taking more resources than they initially claimed they needed." Hammond had noticed this too. Confederate mining operations had sprung up across the planet, extracting not just precious metals, but also common minerals and even soil samples. "They're desperate for something," she said. "Something specific to Earth, if we could figure out what." The door burst open. One of their lookouts, Alan, rushed in. "We've got a situation. There's an alien outside. Alone. Says he wants to talk." Miller drew his weapon. "Trap. He's unarmed," Alan insisted. "And he's not wearing Confederate armor. Says his name is Vexnar." Hammond and Miller exchanged glances. Against better judgment, they agreed to meet this visitor. The alien waited in an alley behind the library. He was smaller than most Confederates, with paler skin and nervous movements. When he spoke, his translator device gave his words a metallic quality. "Dr. Hammond, Major Miller, your resistance is known even among Confederate command. What do you want?" Miller kept his hand near his weapon. "To help. The occupation of Earth. It violates our ancient laws. Many in the Confederacy oppose it." "Why?" Hammond asked. "What makes Earth special?" Vexnar looked around nervously. "Your planet contains elements not found elsewhere in mapped space. Elements essential to Confederate technology. The High Command hid this fact to justify invasion. And why help us?" Miller remained suspicious. "Because the Confederacy I serve should be an alliance of equals, not conquerors. And because what they plan next for Earth will destroy everything." Hammond stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "They're not just mining resources," Vexnar said quietly. "They're preparing for total extraction. Your people will be relocated to labor planets. Miller's face hardened. When? 3 Earth months. Unless someone stops them. Vexnar pulled out a small device. This contains access codes and tactical information. Use it wisely. As he slipped away into the shadows, Hammond and Miller looked at each other, the weight of their planet's future suddenly much heavier on their shoulders. Project Thunderstrike would need to move ahead of schedule. The abandoned mineshaft 20 miles outside Denver had become the main testing facility for Project Thunderstrike. Dr. Hammond stood behind a protective barrier, her eyes fixed on the small device in the center of the chamber. It looked unremarkable, just a metal cylinder the size of a coffee thermos with a few blinking lights. Power level stable, reported Dr. Paddle from his monitoring station. Ready when you are. Hammond took a deep breath. Initiating in 3, 2, 1. She pressed the button on her remote. The device emitted a soft hum that gradually increased in pitch until it was barely audible. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Confederate drone they had captured began to twitch. Its lights flickered, and small arcs of energy danced across its surface. With a final sputter, it dropped to the ground, completely disabled. The room erupted in cheers. 6 weeks of work had paid off. How long until it reboots? Miller asked, stepping forward to examine the drone. Based on previous tests, about 8 hours, Hammond replied. The quantum disruption completely severs their control networks. They have to physically reset each affected unit. Miller nodded, already thinking of tactical applications. And the range? 1/2 mile radius with this prototype. Enough to disable Confederate tech in a small compound or convoy. We need to get these into production immediately, Miller said. How many can you make? With the materials we have, maybe 20 units. If we can secure more alien power cells, we could make hundreds. The door to the testing chamber opened, and a resistance fighter named Kyle rushed in. You need to see this, he said, handing Miller a tablet. The screen showed a live feed from one of their hidden cameras in Denver. A massive Confederate ship was landing at their headquarters, larger and more imposing than any they had seen before. That's not a regular transport, Hammond said, studying the design. A figure emerged from the ship, taller than other Confederates, wearing ornate armor with red markings. That's General Krovac, came a voice from behind them. Vexnar had entered silently, still uncomfortable around large groups of humans. Military commander of the entire occupation force. His presence means your resistance has been deemed a significant threat. Miller's expression hardened. Good. Over the next 2 weeks, Thunderstrike units went into production. Using Vexnar's intelligence and the underground network Miller had established, they distributed the devices to resistance cells across North America. Hammond worked tirelessly to improve the design, making the units smaller and more powerful. She barely slept, driven by both scientific curiosity and fierce determination to free her planet. You should rest, Miller told her one night, finding her still working at 3 a.m. Can't, she said simply. Krovac has doubled the extraction schedule. We're running out of time. Miller sat beside her. We've got confirmation. 3 successful operations last night. Confederate patrols disabled in Seattle, Chicago, and Austin. No resistance casualties. Hammond allowed herself a small smile. It's working. Yes, but Krovac is responding. Increased patrols, random searches, new security protocols. And there's something else. He showed her images from their scouts. Massive drilling operations beginning in multiple locations around the world. They're accelerating whatever they came here for, Hammond said softly. Their planning session was interrupted by an urgent message from their lookouts. Confederate forces were moving toward their location in large numbers. They found us, Miller said, immediately activating the evacuation protocol. Everyone moved to backup location Delta. 2 minutes to clear out. As they gathered essential equipment, Hammond grabbed the latest Thunderstrike prototype. If they're coming with everything they have, this is our chance to test the wide-area version. You haven't completed the safety checks, Patel warned. No choice now, Hammond replied. As Confederate ships appeared on the horizon, the resistance team disappeared into hidden tunnels. Hammond remained behind with Miller and 2 volunteers. If this works, she said, activating the enhanced Thunderstrike, we'll have the weapon we need to take the fight to them. The device began to hum, louder than previous versions. Hammond watched her readings spike off the charts as the approaching Confederate ships suddenly lurched in the sky. It's working, she exclaimed. The range is extending beyond my calculations, nearly 5 miles. Miller grinned as the alien vessels began dropping from the sky. Time to show the Confederacy what happens when Earth fights back. The turning point came 6 months into the occupation. What had started as scattered resistance cells had grown into a coordinated global movement. Thunderstrike devices had been distributed to fighters on every continent, with Hammond's team constantly improving the design. Miller stood in their new headquarters, a repurposed subway station beneath what used to be Philadelphia. A large map covered one wall, with glowing dots representing resistance strongholds and Confederate bases. Status report. He called out to the communications team. Tokyo cell successful. Confederate Command Center disabled for 6 hours, reported Lisa, their operations coordinator. Sydney and Caro report similar results. The synchronized strike worked. Miller allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. For the first time, they had coordinated simultaneous attacks across the globe. The message was clear. Humanity could fight back everywhere at once. Hammond entered the command center, dark circles under her eyes, but a determined set to her jaw. The portable units are ready, she announced, holding up a device the size of a cell phone. Radius is smaller, about 200 feet, but they can be carried in a pocket. How many? Asked Miller. 500, with components for another 1,000 in production. Miller nodded. Our scouts report Krovac has moved his headquarters to the former UN building in New York. Most of the Confederate command staff is there. That's our next target, Hammond asked. Yes, but this time, I'm leading the team myself. Hammond looked concerned. That's deep in occupied territory. Security will be unprecedented. That's why we need to go. Their central database will be there, information on all their operations, extraction sites, and hopefully their plans. As they prepared for the mission, Hammond made a surprising discovery. During tests on Confederate biological samples provided by Vexnar, she noticed something unusual. They're showing cellular damage, she explained to Miller. Not from our weapons, but from exposure to Earth itself. She pulled up microscope images on her tablet. See these patterns. Earth bacteria are affecting them, not enough to cause immediate illness, but it's weakening them over time. Can we use this? Miller asked, immediately thinking of tactical applications. Possibly. I need more time to research, but it might explain why they're always in those environmental suits. The raid on Confederate headquarters was scheduled for 3 days later. Miller led a team of 12, each carrying Hammond's newest Thunderstrike devices. They'd moved through maintenance tunnels that predated the alien occupation, using Vexnar's intelligence to avoid patrols. The plan worked perfectly until they reached the main control room. The Thunderstrike disabled the security systems, but they hadn't expected General Krovac to be present. The massive alien commander was less affected by the disruption than his subordinates, managing to trigger an alarm before Miller could stop him. We've got 5 minutes, Max, Miller shouted as his team rushed to download data from the Confederate systems. Got it, called Ryan, their tech specialist. Downloading everything now. As they retreated with the precious data, Krovac's voice boomed through the building's announcement system. You believe you have won a victory today, humans, but you have only earned your planet's punishment. They barely escaped as Confederate reinforcements swarmed the area. By nightfall, they were safely back at their headquarters, analyzing the stolen information. What they found changed everything. The Confederacy is dying, Hammond said softly as she reviewed the data. Their home systems are facing catastrophic resource depletion. Earth isn't just another conquest. It's their last hope for survival. Miller pointed to another section of data. Look here. Other species they've conquered are rebelling, inspired by our resistance. The moment of triumph was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the base. Multiple orbital strikes detected, shouted the monitoring team. They're targeting major cities worldwide. On their screens, they watched in horror as Krovac made good on his threat. Precision energy weapons struck from space, devastating city centers across the globe. This is his response, Miller said grimly. He's telling Earth to surrender or be destroyed. Hammond's face hardened with resolve. No, he's showing us that we need to take the fight beyond Earth. As the monitors showed destruction raining down from above, she pulled out her latest research. I've isolated which Earth bacteria affect them most severely. We can weaponize this, not just to defend Earth, but to take the war to their ships. Miller studied her for a moment. You're talking about a counter-invasion. Hammond nodded. Exactly. The time for defense is over. We need to take the fight to them. In space, the transition from resistance to offensive force happened with remarkable speed. Within 3 weeks of Krovac's orbital strikes, humanity had a new mission: take the fight to space. In a hidden facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Hammond supervised the modification of 5 commercial spacecraft that had survived the initial invasion. Engineers worked around the clock, installing Thunderstrike technology and adapting the ships for combat. The bacterial agent is ready, Hammond told Miller as they inspected the lead vessel. It's harmless to humans, but will cause progressive respiratory failure in Confederate biology. Non-lethal at first, but debilitating. Miller nodded gravely. And delivery method: aerosol dispersal through their ventilation systems. Their ships recycle air, just like ours do. They named the lead ship Defiance, a fitting title for Earth's first counterattack. The plan was simple but dangerous. Use Thunderstrike devices to disable a Confederate orbital platform, board it, and gather intelligence for a larger assault. We launch tomorrow, Miller announced to the gathered pilots and soldiers. This is a volunteer mission only. Success means we gain a foothold in space. Failure means he didn't need to finish. Everyone knew the stakes. The next morning, 5 modified ships rose silently from hidden locations across North America. Using Confederate blind spots identified by Vexnar, they approached the orbital platform undetected. 30 seconds to range, reported the pilot of Defiance. Miller checked his assault team. 20 soldiers equipped with the latest Thunderstrike devices and bacterial dispersal units. Activating primary Thunderstrike in 3, 2, 1. Hammond's voice was steady as she initiated the device from her station. The effect was immediate. The platform's external lights flickered and died. Defense systems went offline. The massive structure became a dormant hulk in orbit. All ships proceed to docking positions, Miller ordered. Boarding was surprisingly easy. Confederate forces on the platform were disoriented by the sudden failure of their technology. Miller's team moved efficiently through the corridors, securing sections and deploying bacterial agents into the ventilation system. Command center secured, Miller reported back to Hammond. Downloading their navigational data now. What they found exceeded their expectations. The platform contained not just tactical information, but access codes to Confederate battlecruisers. And more importantly, a massive battlecruiser was docked on the far side of the platform for maintenance. Change of plans, Miller decided. We're taking that cruiser. The Confederate crew, already weakened by the bacterial agent, offered minimal resistance. Within hours, the massive warship was under human control, its systems being studied and adapted by Hammond's technical team. I figured out their propulsion system, she reported excitedly. It's based on quantum displacement, essentially folding space to travel faster than light. Miller looked out the command viewport at Earth below. Can you make it work for us? Already have, she replied with a tight smile. Navigational systems show a Confederate mining colony 3 light-years from here. It's processing resources taken from Earth. The decision was unanimous. Earth's first interstellar mission would be to liberate the stolen resources and potentially free other enslaved species. The journey took just under 14 hours, a fact that still amazed the human crew. When they emerged near the colony, they immediately detected 12 Confederate ships in orbit. "They're not expecting us," Miller observed. "Their weapons are powered down." The Defiance struck without warning. Thunderstrike devices disabled the Confederate vessels one by one, allowing boarding parties to secure each ship with minimal casualties. On the planet below, they discovered something unexpected: humans. Thousands had been transported from Earth to work the mines alongside other alien species. "You came for us," said one man in disbelief as Miller's team secured the main compound. Earth fought back. The liberation of the mining colony sent shockwaves through the Confederacy. For the first time, their leadership faced an uncomfortable truth. The species they had dismissed as primitive had not only resisted occupation, but had taken the fight to the stars. General Krovac's response was swift and brutal. A message spread across Confederate communications: the full might of the Confederacy will converge on the Sol system. Earth's rebellion ends now. Hammond intercepted the transmission aboard the Defiance. "They're sending everything they have," she told Miller. "The Grand Armada is mobilizing." Miller's expression remained determined. "Good. We'll be ready." The message arrived unexpectedly on the Defiance's communication system during their return journey to Earth. It came not from humans, but from a species calling themselves the Vorkeni, reptilian beings enslaved by the Confederacy decades earlier. "Your resistance has awakened something across the galaxy," the Vorkeni representative explained through a translator. "Others have tried to fight before, but none have succeeded as Earth has." Miller and Hammond exchanged glances of surprise. They weren't alone in this fight. "How many other species are enslaved by the Confederacy?" Hammond asked. 17 fully subjugated planets, with dozens more under partial control," came the reply. "Many are now in open rebellion after news of Earth's successes spread." Within days, representatives from 5 different species arrived at Earth's makeshift space station, a collection of captured Confederate vessels linked together in orbit. Here, the Free Worlds Coalition was born. "The Confederacy has ruled through fear and technology," explained Zoll, a towering amphibian being from the Kepler system. "They convinced each world they were alone in resistance. You broke that illusion." Hammond spent hours with the alien scientists, sharing her discoveries about Confederate weaknesses while learning about their specialized knowledge. The collaboration yielded fast results. "We can adapt your Thunderstrike technology to work across vast distances," explained a Vorkeni engineer named Tesh. "Our species specialized in communications before our conquest." Meanwhile, Millard focused on training multi-species combat teams. The diversity proved challenging but offered unique advantages. "The Confederacy's tactical systems are designed to predict human responses," he explained during a briefing. "They struggle with our unpredictability already. Now imagine facing 5 different species with completely different ways of thinking." Earth became the unlikely headquarters for the growing rebellion. Ships arrived daily. Deserters from Confederate fleets, representatives from newly freed worlds, and smugglers offering supplies and intelligence. Hammond's breakthrough came during a session with Tesh and the other alien scientists. "Quantum entanglement," she said suddenly, looking up from her calculations. "If we can entangle particles across multiple ships, we could create a cascading disruption effect." Finished Tesh, "not just disable their technology, but use their own quantum network against them." Hammond nodded excitedly. Every connected Confederate ship would amplify the effect. The concept was revolutionary, a superweapon that could disable entire fleets without destroying them. They called it Project Harmony, an ironic name for a weapon designed to create massive quantum discord. The first test succeeded beyond their expectations, disabling 3 captured Confederate vessels, simultaneously from a distance of 50,000 miles. How soon until it's ready for full deployment? Miller asked during the project review. 2 weeks, maybe less, Hammond replied. But it has limitations. We need to be within the Confederate command network to initiate the cascade. Their planning was interrupted by urgent news. Scout ships reported the Confederate Grand Armada had arrived at the edge of the solar system. Over 300 warships led by General Krovac's flagship. More concerning, sensors showed the armada was divided. Nearly a third of the ships were moving at reduced speed, their formations irregular. They're fighting among themselves. Vexnar explained, having become a trusted advisor to the coalition. News of your victories has caused a schism. Many believe the conquest of Earth violates our ancient laws. That night, coalition leaders gathered on the Defiance to finalize their strategy. The Grand Armada will reach Jupiter in 36 hours, Miller reported. Their divided state gives us an advantage, but they still outnumber us significantly. Hammond activated a holographic display showing their defensive positions. Project Harmony can target their command ships, but we need to get close enough to deploy it. My people will provide distraction attacks. Zol volunteered. We're familiar with their patrol patterns. As the meeting concluded, a communication officer burst in. Sir, we're receiving a direct transmission from the Confederate flagship. The view screen activated to show General Krovac's imposing figure. Humans, he began, his translator making his voice sound mechanical. Your rebellion has gone far enough. Surrender Earth now, and your people will be spared. Resist, and we will reduce your world to ash. Miller stepped forward. We've heard these threats before, General. But now you face not just Earth, but the Free Worlds Coalition. For the first time, they saw something like uncertainty cross the General's alien features. The battle began in the shadow of Jupiter. The Coalition fleet, a patchwork of captured Confederate vessels and modified Earth ships, took formation behind the gas giant's largest moon, Ganymede. They were outnumbered 3-1, but they had something the Confederacy did not: unity of purpose. All ships report ready, announced the Vorkani communications officer on the Defiance's bridge. Miller nodded, his expression calm despite the weight of the moment. Begin Operation Harmony. The first phase of their plan was deception. 20 small, fast ships emerged from behind Ganymede, appearing to make a direct assault on the Confederate armada. The massive enemy fleet responded predictably, redirecting defensive systems and weapons toward the apparent threat. They're taking the bait, Hammond observed from her station. Defensive grid is focused forward. While the Confederate ships concentrated on the decoy attack, the main coalition fleet split into 3 battle groups and moved silently around Jupiter's other moons. Miller commanded the central force aboard the Defiance. Phase 2, he ordered as they emerged from the planet's magnetic shadow. All ships, initiate precision jumps. Using the quantum displacement technology Hammond had adapted, the coalition vessels executed near-instantaneous short jumps, appearing directly among the Confederate formation. Before the enemy could react, Thunderstrike devices activated on every coalition ship. Quantum disruption wave successful, reported Tesh. 87% of Confederate vessels showing systems failure. The massive Confederate ships drifted helplessly, their weapons and propulsion disabled. Only the command ships with specialized shielding remained operational, including Krovac's flagship. Project Harmony ready for deployment, Hammond announced, her fingers hovering over the activation sequence. Entanglement matrix stable. Miller took a deep breath. Activate. The device hummed to life, creating a cascading wave of quantum disruption that spread from ship to ship through the Confederate command network. On the view screens, they watched as even the shielded vessels began to lose power. Lights flickered and died across the massive armada. It worked, Hammond whispered, almost unable to believe it. Every Confederate ship in the system is disabled. Miller wasted no time. Launch boarding parties. I want control of those command ships, especially Krovac's flagship. The next 6 hours were a coordinated effort as coalition forces boarded the disabled Confederate vessels. Most crews surrendered without resistance when faced with the combined forces of multiple species they had once subjugated. Miller personally led the team that boarded Krovac's flagship. They found the imposing general still on the bridge, surrounded by loyal officers. "You have lost, General," Miller stated simply. "Your fleet is disabled. Your crews are surrendering across the system. It's over." Krovac stood to his full height, nearly 2 feet taller than Miller. "This is merely one battle. The Confederacy spans hundreds of systems." "Not anymore," came a voice from behind Miller. Admiral Ventar, Krovac's second-in-command, stepped forward. "While you were focused on Earth, rebellions have spread throughout our territories. The High Council has been overthrown." For the first time, Miller saw genuine shock in the general's alien features. "The old ways are returning," Ventar continued. "The Confederacy was meant to be an alliance of equals, not an empire of conquest. Earth has reminded us of this." As Krovac was taken into custody, news arrived from across the galaxy. The Confederate leadership had indeed faced an internal coup. Systems that had been under occupation for generations were declaring independence and joining the coalition. 1 week later, representatives from 32 species gathered on Earth's orbital station for a historic summit. Hammond and Miller sat side by side as honored architects of the victory that had reshaped galactic politics. "Today we establish new protocols," announced the newly appointed Galactic Council leader, a respected Vorkani elder. "No species shall dominate another. All technological advancements shall be shared for common benefit. And Earth shall have a permanent seat on the Council in recognition of their pivotal role." As the chamber erupted in approval, Hammond turned to Miller. "Not bad for a species that only learned about alien life a year ago." Miller smiled, watching the diverse gathering of beings that had once been enemies. "Turns out humans are pretty good at bringing people together." On the view screen behind them, Earth rotated peacefully, no longer under threat. The planet that had fought back when invasion came had not only secured its own freedom, but had transformed the galaxy itself.